Last Tuesday, my son sat across from me at my own kitchen table in the house I have lived in for 31 years and said, "Mum, just sign the paper and this all goes away." The paper would give him my house, my savings account, my investment portfolio, my retirement fund, everything I spent 40 years building with his father, everything Paul and I sacrificed for, everything I protected and grew and tended to through widowhood and grief and 4 years of learning how to be a person without the man I built my entire adult life beside. 2 months before that Tuesday, that same son had me strapped to a gurney and transported to a psychiatric ward. Want to know what changed between then and now? I found the group chat, 2,847 messages, between my 3 children, about me, dating back almost 2 years. Sent while they were sitting at my dinner table telling me they loved me, sent while they were hugging me at Christmas, sent while they were looking me in the eye and asking how I was sleeping, how I was eating, whether I was feeling confused lately. Every lie they told about me, every plan they made, every carefully calculated step of the strategy they built to take everything I had ever worked for. They forgot I know their passwords. I set up those passwords, every single one of them. When Brian got his first smartphone, he called me because he didn't understand how to set up an account. When Kelly forgot her email password 3 years ago, she called me, and I walked her through resetting it. When Ashley was setting up her laptop after her old one died, I sat beside her at this very kitchen table and helped her choose passwords she'd remember. I gave them those passwords. I gave them so much more than passwords. Biggest mistake they ever made was forgetting where everything they know came from. I am going to tell you this entire story today, from the very beginning, from Paul, from the life we built, all the way to last Tuesday when my son sat across from me with papers in his hand and desperation in his eyes. I am not going to leave anything out. I am not going to soften the parts that make my children look bad. I am not going to protect anyone's reputation at the expense of the truth. Because what happened to me is happening to women all over this country right now, today, while you are sitting there watching this. Most of them do not know how to fight back. Most of them do not even fully understand yet what is being done to them. I do, and by the end of this, you will too. My name is Diane. I am 63 years old. I live in a house in Ohio that my husband Paul and I bought together in the spring of 1993. We had driven past it 3 times before we finally stopped. It was a Saturday morning, and the forsythia bushes along the front walk were blooming yellow, and Paul said, "That's the one." Just like that. No hesitation. Paul was like that. He saw what he wanted, and he said so, and he went after it. I wish I had learned that lesson from him earlier than I did. Paul grew up in a small town in eastern Ohio, the son of a man who worked in a factory and a mother who cleaned houses for other families. He was the first person in his family to finish high school without interruption. He never went to college. He started working construction at 18, and by the time he was 30, he had his own company with 4 employees. By the time he was 45, he had 60 employees and contracts across 3 counties. Paul built things. That was who he was at his core. He built his company from absolutely nothing. He built our house into a home with his own hands on weekends, adding the back porch himself one summer, retiling the kitchen another year, putting in the garden that I still tend every spring. He built a life for our family that neither of us had growing up, and he built me up too. That is the thing about Paul that I find hardest to explain to people who didn't know him. He had this quality of making the people around him feel more capable than they believed themselves to be. I was a shy woman when we married, uncertain of myself in ways I carried from a difficult childhood. Paul never pushed me. He just consistently treated me as if I was exactly as strong and intelligent and capable as he believed me to be, until eventually I started to believe it too. We had 38 years together. Brian came first in 1986, and I remember Paul in the hospital holding that baby boy with his big construction worker hands so carefully, so terrified of doing something wrong, and I thought, this man is going to be a wonderful father. Kelly came 3 years later, Ashley 4 years after that, 3 kids in 7 years, which meant there were years in there that were genuinely hard, years where money was tighter than we let the kids know, years where Paul and I were both exhausted in ways we didn't have language for, years where we operated more as co-managers of a household than as husband and wife. But we came through all of it. We came through the tight years and the exhausted years, and the years when the kids were teenagers and the house felt like it was held together by tension and arguments and slammed doors. We came through Paul's business having a terrible year in 2008 and us not knowing for 6 months whether he was going to have to let people go. We came through my mother's illness and then her death and the complicated grief of losing a parent you had a complicated relationship with. We came through all of it because we chose each other every single time it would have been easier not to. Paul got his diagnosis in the spring of 2018, early onset dementia. He was 59 years old. He had been having small episodes for about a year that we'd both been explaining away, forgetting words mid-sentence, getting confused about dates. A few moments of disorientation that passed quickly and that we did not talk about directly because talking about them directly would have made them real. When they became real, Paul handled it the way he handled everything. He got the information, he made a plan. He sold his share of the business to his partner Dave while he was still sharp enough to negotiate properly. He updated all our legal documents. He sat down with me and went through everything, every account, every policy, every asset, and made sure I understood all of it completely. He said, "Diane, I need you to know everything because you're going to need to handle it without me." I said, "You're going to be here." He said, "I'm going to be here, but I might not always be me. You need to know everything now, while I'm still me." So I learned everything, every account, every investment, every insurance policy. I sat with Paul's accountant and Paul's attorney, and I learned the things I had let Paul handle because he was better at them, and I trusted him completely. I learned them because he needed me to. Paul died in January of 2020. He was 61 years old. The dementia had progressed faster than the doctors initially predicted. The last 8 months were hard in ways I will not describe in detail out of respect for his dignity and my own. What I will say is that I was there for all of it, every single day. I did not put him in a facility. I cared for him at home with some professional help, and I held his hand at the end, and I told him everything I needed to tell him, even though I don't know how much he heard. He died on a Tuesday morning in January, while it was snowing outside, the soft, heavy snow that Paul always loved, because he said it made the world quiet. I have learned since then that grief does not follow any kind of schedule or logic. I have learned that you can be completely devastated and also somehow still functional. I have learned that widowhood at 59 is a particular kind of lonely that is different from any other kind of lonely, because everywhere you look there are the shapes of a life that was built for 2, and you are only 1, and you have to decide every single day whether to keep building or to stop. I decided to keep building. The first year was survival. That is the only word for it. I survived it. I kept the house. I managed the finances, which I now knew how to do because Paul had made sure of it. I accepted help from my children when they offered it, and I was grateful for it. Brian came over on weekends sometimes to handle things around the house. Kelly called every few days. Ashley texted daily, which was her way of showing love. In those first months after Paul died, I believed my children were good people who loved me. I want to be honest about that. I am not someone who looks back and pretends I always knew. I did not always know. For the first 2 years after Paul died, I believed my children were grieving their father and supporting their mother, and that what I was seeing from them was genuine. The second year I started to rebuild in earnest, I redecorated the bedroom, new bedding, new curtains, rearranged the furniture so it was mine now rather than ours. I started volunteering at a women's shelter 3 days a week, something I'd wanted to do for years, but that our life hadn't easily accommodated. I joined a book club that met on Thursday evenings at Gloria's house. I started walking 5 miles every morning, which Paul and I had always done together, and which I continued alone because stopping felt like letting go of something I wasn't ready to release. I was okay, more than okay. I was discovering parts of myself I had set aside during 38 years of marriage and motherhood, not because Paul had suppressed them, he never would have, but because there is only so much of yourself you can tend to when you are also tending to children, and a husband, and a household, and a career. Parts of me had been waiting patiently for space to grow. They started growing. I liked who was emerging. Paul's business partner Dave died unexpectedly 18 months after Paul did. Heart attack, similar to Paul, no warning. Dave had never married and had no children. He had been carrying a private debt to Paul for 15 years, a loan Paul had made him in the early days of the business when Dave needed it, and which Dave had always intended to repay with interest. Dave had made provision for it in his will. His attorney called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was in my garden pulling weeds. I stood up with dirt on my knees and heard that Dave had left me $500,000. I sat back down on the ground. That $500,000, combined with the life insurance and the business sale proceeds, brought my total assets to approximately $2.8 million, including the house. I called my children as soon as I got off the phone with Dave's attorney. We went to dinner that weekend to celebrate. It was a good dinner. Brian made a toast to Dave. Kelly said how lovely it was that Dave had done right by Paul even after Paul was gone. Ashley cried a little because she'd always liked Dave, and his death had been another loss on top of their father's. At the end of the dinner, Brian raised his glass one more time and said, "Mum, you're set for life now." I thought he was happy for me. I did not yet hear what he was actually saying. 3 weeks after that dinner, I told my children I was donating $300,000 to the women's shelter. I had thought about this decision carefully for months. I had talked to my financial advisor about it. I had talked to Margaret Holloway, my attorney, about the tax implications and the best structure for the gift. I had visited the shelter and sat with the director and understood exactly what the money would do. 10 additional beds, a job training program, a legal advocacy fund for women navigating custody and divorce and restraining orders. I knew exactly what I was doing with that money. I had thought about it with the full capacity of a fully functioning adult mind. And I was doing it because Paul, who grew up with nothing, who built everything from nothing, had always said that if he ever had real money, he wanted to help people who were starting from nothing the way he had. This was for him as much as for me. I told the kids at Sunday dinner at Brian's house, Brian and his wife Sarah, Kelly and her husband Tom, Ashley with her boyfriend Derek, a smooth-talking man I had never entirely trusted. The table went quiet. Not the surprised quiet of people processing unexpected news. The specific tense quiet of people deciding how to respond to something that affects them. Brian smiled. The smile did not reach his eyes. He said, "Mum, that's incredibly generous. Are you sure you're thinking clearly about this?" That phrase, "Are you sure you're thinking clearly?" That was the first time I heard it. I said I was absolutely sure. I had been thinking about it for months. I had consulted professionals. I understood exactly what I was doing. Kelly said, "It's just a lot of money, Mum." I said I was aware of how much money it was. I was the one who had it. Tom, who is Kelly's husband and a lawyer, said with practiced neutrality, "Have you considered the tax implications?" I said yes. My attorney and I had been through all of it thoroughly. Ashley said nothing. She was looking at Derek, and Derek was looking at Brian. Some kind of communication passed between them that I could not fully read in the moment. A look with weight behind it. We moved on. Dinner continued. Everybody hugged me when I left. Brian held on a few seconds longer than usual and said, "We love you, Mum. We just want you to be okay." I drove home thinking that was a strange thing to say in response to someone donating to charity. I filed it away and didn't examine it further. I should have examined it further. By the time I was washing my face getting ready for bed that night, my 3 children were already texting each other about the situation. I found those texts later when I found everything. The first message Brian sent that night at 9:47 p.m. was this: "We need to talk about Mom. This is getting out of hand." Kelly responded within 2 minutes. "I know. Tom said if she's making decisions like this, we might need to look at our options." Ashley: "What options?" Brian: "There are legal ways to protect her from herself if she's not thinking clearly." Ashley: "She seemed fine to me." Brian: "That's the thing with cognitive decline. It looks fine on the surface." I was washing my face. I was thinking about the shelter director's face when I'd told her about the gift, the way her eyes had gone bright with something real and unperformed. I was feeling good. I was feeling like myself. And my children had already decided I was in cognitive decline because I wanted to give money to women who needed it. The next 6 weeks were a campaign. I understand now that's exactly the right word for it. A coordinated, strategic campaign with a specific goal, run by people who knew me well enough to know exactly which levers to pull. It started small enough that I dismissed every single incident as it happened. That is the nature of this kind of manipulation when it is done well. Each individual moment seems minor, explainable, possibly even your own fault. It is only when you step back and look at the full pattern that you understand what is being constructed around you, brick by careful brick. Brian started calling me every day. He had never called every day before. Maybe twice a week when things were good, more during the grief year, but not every day as routine. He would call in the morning before I went for my walk and ask how I was feeling. Was I sleeping okay? Was I eating well? Had I taken my blood pressure medication? I do not take blood pressure medication. I have never taken blood pressure medication. My blood pressure is excellent for my age, which my doctor mentions approvingly every year. The first time Brian asked about the blood pressure medication, I said, "I don't take blood pressure medication." He said, "Oh, I thought Dr. Patterson had put you on something recently." I said he hadn't. Brian said, "Maybe I'm thinking of something else." And the conversation moved on. But now the thought was in my head. Had Dr. Patterson mentioned something at my last appointment that I hadn't fully registered? Had I been distracted during some part of the appointment? I thought back through it, and I was sure, completely sure, that no medication had been mentioned. But the fact that I was reviewing my memory of a doctor's appointment to check whether I had somehow missed being prescribed medication was itself the point. Brian had planted a seed of doubt and walked away from it and let it grow on its own. Kelly was sending articles, links texted with no comment, no framing, no "I thought this was interesting" or "Have you seen this?" Just links. Articles about memory loss in women over 60. Articles about the warning signs of early onset dementia. Articles about how cognitive decline can be subtle and insidious in its early stages. Articles about women who seemed completely fine to everyone around them and then suddenly were not fine at all. She sent one every 3 to 4 days, consistently, never aggressive, never direct. Just a steady drip of the subject of dementia into the background of my daily life, until that subject was living in my mind the way a low, persistent hum lives in a room, present even when you stop actively noticing it. Ashley started finishing my sentences. I would begin to say something, and she would jump in with what she thought I was about to say, spoken in a helpful, patient tone, with an expression that I can only describe as gently pitying, the kind of expression you might use with a child who is struggling to find the right word. It bothered me more than anything Brian or Kelly was doing because it was so constant. Every conversation, every single time. I addressed it once, gently. I said, "Honey, let me finish my own thoughts." She looked genuinely hurt. She said she was sorry, she just wanted to help. She'd noticed lately that I sometimes seemed to trail off. I said I wasn't trailing off. She nodded in a way that suggested she was choosing not to argue rather than actually agreeing with me. After that, I became hyper-aware of every sentence I started. I would consciously make sure to finish each thought completely, which had the effect of making me speak more slowly and deliberately than I normally do, which of course gave Ashley more to point to as evidence of something being wrong. About 3 weeks in, I had dinner at Brian and Sarah's house, just the four of us. Brian said that I had called him the previous week and told him I was thinking about selling the house. He said we had talked about it for 20 minutes. He said I had mentioned feeling like the house was too much for one person, and he had been worried about the conversation ever since. I said I had not made that call. He said I had. He was gentle about it, loving, concerned. He said I might not remember it. I said I would never call about selling the house because I have no intention of selling the house, and I was completely certain I had made no such call. He said, very quietly, very carefully, "Mum, that's kind of the point. You might not remember." Sarah was watching me. Her expression was not cruel. It looked like genuine worry, which was in some ways worse than cruelty, because either Sarah genuinely believed what Brian was telling her, in which case he had been lying to his own wife about his mother, or Sarah was part of it, in which case there were more people in this than I had understood. I drove home from that dinner, and I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I thought about Paul's dementia. I thought about the genetic component of certain types of dementia. I thought about whether I had made a phone call I truly did not remember making. I examined my memory of the previous week with the kind of forensic attention that you only apply to your own mind when someone you trust has given you reason to distrust it. And then something shifted, something settled. No, I did not make that call. I know my own mind, I know my own life, and the fact that my son is telling me I did, and telling me my inability to remember it is evidence of a medical problem rather than evidence that it never happened, is not love. It is not concern. It is manipulation. The next morning, I went to an office supply store and bought a plain black journal. I came home and I wrote down everything I could remember from the previous 6 weeks. Every fabricated incident, every article Kelly had sent, every sentence Ashley had completed for me, every phone call from Brian asking about medications I don't take. I wrote it all down with dates as close as I could reconstruct them and exact words as close as I could remember them. Then I went back to the store and bought a small digital voice recorder that fit in my jacket pocket. I did not know yet how important that recorder would become. I did not know yet that I was preparing for a fight I hadn't fully understood was coming. I just knew that something was wrong, and that if I was going to survive it, I needed to be able to prove, with documentation and evidence, what was true. About a month after the dinner conversation about the shelter donation, Brian called and asked if he could come over on Saturday morning. He said he wanted to discuss some things as a family. I said of course. He arrived alone, sat across from me at this kitchen table. He had a piece of paper with him, folded in half, which he didn't open but kept on the table between us. He said the family was concerned about me, that they had all been talking, that they had noticed some changes and they were worried and they wanted to help. I asked what changes. He listed them. The call about the house that never happened. A birthday he said I'd forgotten, which was his own birthday, which I had in fact remembered and had sent a card for, a card he had received and texted me about. A medication confusion that never happened. A time I had apparently gotten lost driving home from the shelter and called Kelly in distress, which was entirely fabricated. Small things, each one, but together forming a picture of a woman in steady, worrying decline. I sat across from my son and I watched him lie to my face about my own life. Every single thing he said was either completely fabricated or twisted so far from what had actually happened that it no longer resembled reality. And I kept my expression neutral, I kept my voice calm, and I said, "What are you suggesting, Brian?" He said the family thought it would be a good idea for me to see a specialist, a geriatric psychiatrist, just to get a baseline evaluation, just to make sure everything was all right. He had a name ready, Dr. Alan Morris. He'd done some research, and this doctor was very well regarded. I said I'd think about it. After Brian left, I went to my computer and I looked up Dr. Alan Morris. He was real, licensed, experienced, well-reviewed. But I also found something that made the back of my neck go cold. In a Bar Association continuing education newsletter from the previous year, Dr. Alan Morris had been listed as a co-presenter at a seminar with Tom, Kelly's husband, who 1 week before this conversation had mentioned that there were legal options to protect me from myself. The doctor Brian was recommending to evaluate my mental competence was professionally connected to the lawyer who had already been discussing legal options regarding my estate. I wrote it in the journal. I did not call Dr. Morris. I did not tell my children I wasn't going to call Dr. Morris. I simply waited and watched. 2 weeks later, my own doctor's office called. Dr. Patterson, who has been my physician for 12 years, wanted me to come in for a follow-up appointment. My annual physical had been 3 weeks before. Everything had been fine. The follow-up made no medical sense. I went in. Dr. Patterson was uncomfortable in a way I had never seen him be before. He is normally a direct man. That day he was choosing every word carefully, arranging them like someone trying not to disturb something fragile. He showed me a letter. It was from Dr. Alan Morris. A formal letter of medical concern, addressed to Dr. Patterson, expressing concern about my cognitive health based on, and I am reading from the copy I made of it, reports from family members indicating a pattern of memory loss, confusion, impaired judgment, and behavioral changes consistent with early cognitive decline. Dr. Alan Morris had never examined me. He had never met me. He had never spoken with me. He had written a formal medical letter about my cognitive state based on what my children had told him. That letter was now in my permanent medical file. Dr. Patterson said he was sure it was probably nothing, but he thought a cognitive evaluation might be worthwhile, just to be thorough. I told him I would handle it myself. He nodded with what I read as relief, the relief of a man who had been put in an uncomfortable position by someone else's agenda and was grateful to be released from it. I sat in my car in the parking lot of his office for 15 minutes without starting the engine. There was a letter in my medical file, written by a doctor connected to my son-in-law, claiming cognitive decline, based entirely on fabrications my children had provided. This was not worry. This was construction. They were building something brick by brick, and that letter was a cornerstone of it. I called Margaret Holloway from the parking lot. Margaret is an estate attorney. She handled Paul's estate when he died. She is 58 years old, has been practicing law for 30 years, and has the kind of calm that comes not from distance, but from having seen enough of the worst of human behavior that she is no longer surprised by it. I told her everything. Every entry in the journal, the letter from Dr. Morris, the recommendation to see a specialist who happened to know Tom, the dinner where the donation had set all of this in motion. Margaret listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for 3 seconds. Then she said, "Diane, what you're describing is the early stages of a coordinated attempt to establish legal incapacity over a competent adult. This is elder financial abuse in its planning phase. We need to move right now." She told me what to do. I did every single thing she told me. First, she referred me to a forensic neuropsychologist named Dr. Elaine Westbrook. Board certified, completely independent, no connection whatsoever to anyone in my life or my children's lives. I went in for a 4-hour evaluation. memory testing across multiple domains, cognitive function, executive reasoning, processing speed, attention and concentration, verbal fluency, abstract thinking, every measure they have for how a brain is working. At the end of 4 hours, Dr. Westbrook sat across from me and said, "Mrs. Patterson, you are cognitively in the top percentile for your age group. Your performance on every measure is consistent with someone significantly younger. There is no finding here that would support any concern about your decision-making capacity. None." Margaret sealed that report and held it in her office. Second, I secured every financial account I had, removed any secondary or emergency access that anyone else had, changed every password and every security question, went to my bank in person and instructed them in writing that no changes of any kind were to be made to any account without my physical presence, along with 2 forms of government-issued identification and a verbal confirmation code we established that day. Third, I completely rewrote my will with Margaret. The new will reflected my actual intentions, including the shelter donation, and contained provisions that would make it extremely difficult to challenge on competency grounds, including the sealed neuropsychological evaluation as an attached exhibit and a statement from Dr. Westbrook. Fourth, I installed cameras in my home, small, unobtrusive, positioned at the front door, the kitchen, and the living room. Legal in the state of Ohio for a homeowner to install in common areas of their own property, not in bedrooms, not in bathrooms, in the spaces where conversations happened. Fifth, I called Margaret back and asked her to recommend a private investigator. She gave me the name Rachel Simmons. I called Rachel. We met for coffee. I told her what I needed. She told me what she could do. I hired her. Within 3 weeks, Rachel had obtained the contents of the family group chat my children had been running for nearly 2 years. She had pulled financial records on all 3 of my kids through legal means, public filings, court records, credit inquiries they had authorized for various purposes. And she had documented thoroughly the professional connection between Tom and Dr. Morris, including emails between them that had been subpoenaed as part of a separate matter Rachel was able to access. What she showed me on a Thursday afternoon in her office downtown changed everything I thought I understood. Brian was in debt. Not manageable debt, not the kind of debt people carry and handle. He owed $200,000 across personal loans and business financing. His construction company, the one he had started with money Paul left him, was failing in a slow, grinding way that was about to become a fast, catastrophic way. He had a court date with creditors 6 weeks from the day Rachel and I were sitting in her office. If he could not produce funds by that date, he was going to lose the company and potentially face personal liability. Kelly and Tom were in a different kind of trouble. Tom was under investigation by the State Bar Association for mishandling funds from a client's trust account. He had not been charged yet, but the investigation had been ongoing for 4 months, and he had already spent $40,000 on his own defense attorney and expected to spend considerably more before it was resolved. Ashley had left Derek, the too-smooth boyfriend, 8 months before. The relationship had apparently involved a level of lifestyle spending that Ashley's income could not sustain. She was now living in an apartment she could barely afford and carrying $85,000 in credit card debt. All 3 of my children were financially desperate. None of them had told me. What they had done instead was decide together in 2,847 messages over nearly 2 years that the solution to their financial problems was to access my assets. The plan was detailed, methodical. They had researched Ohio conservatorship law. They understood the legal requirements. They needed medical documentation of cognitive impairment, hence Dr. Morris. They needed a documented pattern of concerning behavior to present to a judge. Hence the fabricated incidents, each one carefully entered into the record of my life. They needed legal counsel they trusted inside the process, hence Tom. And they had a timeline, Brian's court date. His debt crisis was the clock that everything else ran against. Rachel showed me a message from Brian sent 6 weeks before he came to my house with his careful, loving list of concerns. Brian wrote, "If we're going to do this, we need to move. I don't have time to wait around. 6 weeks, maybe 8. That's my window." 6 weeks. My son had given himself 6 weeks to have me legally declared incompetent. I sat in Rachel's office and I read through pages of messages, and I felt something I had not expected and cannot fully explain even now. Not the anger I had been braced for, not the grief I had already been carrying. Something quieter and colder and more absolute than either of those things. Clarity. Complete clarity about exactly what was happening, exactly who these people were, and exactly what I was going to do. I was going to let them run their plan, and I was going to be ready when it arrived. Margaret and I spent the following 2 weeks in close preparation. We documented every piece of evidence Rachel had provided. We prepared a full legal response to a potential conservatorship petition, ready to file the moment one was submitted. We prepared Dr. Westbrook's report for submission. We reviewed the camera footage from my home, which at that point showed Brian, Kelly, and Tom making various statements in my kitchen and living room during family visits that would not look favourable in any courtroom in Ohio. We also prepared the trap. Margaret suggested I call Brian, tell him I'd been thinking, and maybe he was right. Maybe I did need some help. Maybe I was struggling more than I had admitted. Could he come over? I made that call on a Thursday evening. I kept my voice slightly smaller than my normal voice, a little uncertain, a little tired. By Friday afternoon, Brian had organised a family meeting at my house for Saturday morning. All 3 kids, Tom. A notary public they had arranged. They already had documents prepared. Power of attorney, granting Brian control of all financial decisions. Healthcare proxy, removing my ability to make my own medical decisions. A financial management agreement giving Brian administrative access to all my accounts with no requirement to consult me before making decisions. Just needed my signature. They were so ready. I spent Friday night alone. I cooked dinner. I watched a film I had been meaning to see for months. I watered my plants. I walked through every room of the house Paul and I had bought on that spring morning in 1993. The forsythia blooming yellow along the front walk, Paul saying that's the one without a moment's hesitation. I thought about Paul. I thought about what he would have said about this moment. I thought about what he had said to me once, years ago, when a business partner had tried to take advantage of him, and he had discovered it. He had said, "Diane, when someone shows you who they are, you have exactly 2 choices. You can pretend you didn't see it and keep paying the price, or you can act on what you know. I knew who my children were now. I was going to act on what I knew." They arrived Saturday morning at 9 o'clock. Brian and Sarah, Kelly and Tom, Ashley, who arrived last, who came in not quite making eye contact with me, who accepted the coffee I offered and sat in the corner of the living room and was quieter than the others. The notary was a young woman named Jennifer, who would later tell her supervisor she had walked into a situation she had not been prepared for. Tom did the presenting. He was smooth. He had the practiced warmth of a man who has spent years convincing people to do things that primarily benefited someone else. He explained that the family had prepared documents to protect my interests and provide me with support as I navigated this stage of my life. He used that phrase twice. This stage of life. As if I were a child transitioning between school grades rather than a cognitively intact 63-year-old woman with a fully functioning brain and 4 decades of financial management experience. He pushed a folder across the coffee table. I opened it. I read every page, slowly, completely. Tom started to explain things and I held up one finger without looking up and kept reading. He stopped talking. I finished reading. I closed the folder. I picked up the pen they had brought. I looked at Brian. I looked at Kelly. I looked at Ashley, who was still not quite meeting my eyes. I looked at Tom, and I put the pen down. I said, "Before I sign anything, I have one question." Brian said, "Of course, Mom. Anything." I pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the group chat that Rachel had provided me access to. I placed the phone on the coffee table face up where every person in that room could see the screen. The name of the group chat was visible, Mum's Situation. The message count was visible, 2,847 messages. I said, "When were you planning to tell me about this?" The room changed in a way I will never be able to fully describe. The air changed. Every face changed. The comfortable choreography they had rehearsed, the loving, concerned children presenting reasonable documents to a struggling mother, cracked completely open in an instant. Kelly said carefully, "What is that?" I picked up my phone. I read messages out loud. Brian's message about the 6-week window. Kelly's message about Tom's friend who could provide the documentation they needed, referring explicitly to Dr. Morris by name. Tom's message explaining the legal requirements for establishing incapacity in Ohio and what evidence would be most persuasive to a judge. And Ashley's message, the one that I had read 30 times in the days between finding it and this moment. The one that I had pressed my hand against my chest over when I first read it. The one that still sits in me like something heavy when I let myself think about it. Ashley had written, "What if we just wait? She can't live forever." When I read that one, I stopped. I looked at Ashley. She looked at her hands in her lap. Tom said, "Everyone needs to stop talking right now." I said, "You're not my lawyer, Tom. You're not my anything. Sit down." He sat down. Brian stood up. He moved toward the coffee table, toward my phone. I picked it up before he reached it. I said, "My lawyer has had copies of everything on this phone for 2 weeks. The forensic neuropsychologist I hired 6 weeks ago, her full evaluation is in my lawyer's possession. And this conversation, everything since you walked into my house this morning, has been recorded." Kelly made a sound, short and involuntary. I said, "You built a campaign to have me declared legally incompetent. You fabricated incidents and entered them into my medical record. You arranged for a doctor who has never examined me to write a letter of concern to my physician. You coordinated all of it in a group chat called Mom's Situation while sitting at my dinner table telling me you were worried about me." I looked at Brian. "You told me I called you about selling this house. I never made that call. I have the phone records." I looked at Kelly. "You sent me 12 articles about dementia in 8 weeks. I looked at Ashley. "She can't live forever. You wrote that about me, your mother." Ashley started crying. The tears were immediate and I believed they were real. Of the 3 of them, I think Ashley was the one who knew the most clearly that what they were doing was wrong, and who did it anyway because Brian was her older brother, and she was afraid of his anger, and she was desperate, and she told herself it was for my own good often enough that she half believed it. It did not change what she had done. Brian found his composure. He said, "Mom, you're misinterpreting everything. You're being paranoid. We're your family. We love you. We are trying to help you. And here is the thing about that moment that I did not expect. Even knowing everything I knew. Even having spent 2 weeks preparing for exactly this. Even having read every message, seen every lie, understood the full scope of what they had planned. Hearing my son say those words to my face, 'I love you. We are trying to help you,' something broke open in me, not in a way that made me weak, in a way that made me done, completely and finally done. I said, 'Brian, I know about the $200,000. I know about Tom's bar investigation. I know about Ashley's credit cards. I know why you needed a 6-week window. I know all of it.' The silence that followed was different from any silence that had preceded it. This was the silence of people who had been completely, thoroughly, irreversibly exposed. Then Brian made the decision that cost him everything. He called 911. He told the dispatcher his mother was having a psychiatric emergency. That she was paranoid, aggressive, making accusations, not making sense. That he was afraid she might hurt herself. Every word a deliberate lie. I stood in my own living room, in my house, that I paid for, that Paul built a garden in, that I have tended for 31 years. And I watched my son make that call, and I understood that there was no line he would not cross, no floor beneath which he would not go. The police arrived in 11 minutes, an ambulance behind them. I opened my front door before they knocked. I was calm, hands visible, nice blouse. I said, "Good morning, I assume my son called you." The officer looked at Brian over my shoulder and then back at me with the expression of someone rapidly reassessing a situation. I got in that ambulance. I want to be clear about why. Not because I was resigned, not because I had lost. I got in that ambulance because Margaret and I had discussed this scenario specifically. She had said, if they escalate to this, go with them, cooperate fully, do not resist, and let the next steps we have already put in motion do their work. Fighting the ambulance in your own driveway gives them footage of you resisting. Getting in calmly gives them nothing. Margaret, who had been listening to the entire morning from my home office, had left through the back door before the police arrived. She was already on her phone. She had already called the hospital to flag the situation. She had already filed an emergency report with Adult Protective Services. She was already 3 steps ahead, doing exactly what we had planned. The psychiatric unit at Memorial Hospital was quiet. A narrow bed, a window looking at a concrete wall. They took my phone, took my purse, gave me a gown. I lay on that bed and I looked at the concrete wall and I did not panic. I did not fall apart. I grieved, not crying, grieving. The full quiet acknowledgement that something was gone and not coming back. The version of my children I had been carrying, the version where they were misguided but genuinely loving, where this was somehow a misunderstanding, where there was a Brian who actually worried about his mother underneath the scheming one, that version was gone. Reading those messages had taken it apart piece by piece, and lying on that hospital bed, I let myself understand completely that it was gone and was not coming back. I gave myself 1 hour of that grief, fully, without flinching from any of it. Then I was done, and I was ready. The attending psychiatrist came to see me the following morning, Dr. Sarah Chen, 45 or so, thorough, with the specific quality of listening that the best psychiatrists develop, where they hear not just what you say, but everything around what you say. She sat with me for 2 hours. I told her everything. I gave her Margaret's number. Dr. Chen made a call. When she came back, she said, "I'd like to do my own evaluation." She evaluated me for 2 more hours that afternoon. The following morning she came back and sat down and said, "Mrs. Patterson, I have been doing this for 18 years. You are one of the clearest and most cognitively intact people I have evaluated at your age or any other age. There is no psychiatric illness here. There is no cognitive impairment. What I'm looking at is a woman who has been subjected to a coordinated campaign of psychological manipulation by members of her own family, and who has responded with remarkable strategic clarity. She released me after the full 72 hours at my request. I asked her to keep me the full time. She understood why. While I was inside, Margaret needed those days working outside. I will tell you what happened in those 72 hours because I think it matters. Not just my own experience, but what I witnessed. I met women in that unit who were there for the same reason I was. Margaret, 71, whose son had gotten guardianship 2 years before, who had signed things she didn't fully understand, who was now living in a facility her son had chosen while he managed her money. She held my hand and said, "Don't sign anything. Don't sign a single thing." Susan, 68, whose daughter had taken her house. Patricia, 59, with real early-stage dementia, being fought over by children who were not fighting for her well-being. I spent time with each of them. I gave Patricia's name to Dr. Chen and asked her to flag the situation to Protective Services. I promised Margaret I would connect her with Margaret Holloway when I got out. I kept those promises. Dr. Chen's discharge report stated that I showed no psychiatric illness, no cognitive impairment, no danger to self or others, and that the involuntary hold had been initiated based on false statements made by family members with a documented financial interest in establishing my incapacity. That last sentence was not standard language. Dr. Chen put it there deliberately. I walked out of that hospital on a Friday afternoon. Margaret was waiting. She had a great deal to tell me. During my 72 hours, Brian had gone to my bank and been denied. Kelly had tried to enter my house and been unable to. Ashley, according to Rachel, had driven to Brian's house the morning after I was taken to the hospital, sat in his driveway for an hour, and then driven away without going inside. Tom had filed an emergency conservatorship petition with the county court. The hearing was in 10 days. I wore Paul's favourite colour to court, grey. He wore grey to every important meeting he ever had. Tom presented the family's case. He was genuinely skilled at it. The grieving son-in-law register, the carefully curated documentation of incidents, Dr. Morris's letter, statements from all 3 children, a narrative about a loving family watching their mother decline. He did not know about Dr. Westbrook's report. He did not know about Dr. Chen's discharge summary. He did not know the group chat messages had been documented as a legal exhibit. He did not know about the recordings. He thought he was walking into an uncontested case. Margaret let him finish his entire presentation, and then she said, "Your Honour, may I respond?" What she did over the next 45 minutes was one of the most precise and methodical dismantlings of a legal position I have ever witnessed. She presented Dr. Westbrook's evaluation first, establishing my cognitive status at the top percentile for my age, documented 6 weeks before any filing. She presented Dr. Chen's psychiatric evaluation. She presented the forensic documentation of the group chat, with Brian's 6-week deadline message highlighted. She presented the financial records establishing motive. She presented the documented connection between Tom and Dr. Morris, the Bar Association newsletter, the emails. Then she submitted the recordings. Judge Harrington put on reading glasses and read for a long time. Tom looked like he had turned to stone. Brian was staring at the table. Kelly was crying quietly. The judge looked at Tom and said, "Counselor, is it your position that you have no personal financial interest in this matter?" Tom said, "That's correct, Your Honour." The judge held up the documentation of Tom's bar investigation and said, "This document suggests otherwise." Tom said nothing. The judge looked at Brian. "Is donating to a charity an irrational financial decision?" Brian said no. The judge said, "Petition denied," and then he referred the matter to the district attorney, and he sanctioned Tom, and he ordered my legal fees paid by Brian, Kelly, and Tom. In the parking lot, Kelly came toward me. She said, "Mum, please, can we talk?" I looked at my daughter. My 35-year-old daughter who had sent me 12 dementia articles in 8 weeks, who had written in the group chat about the documentation strategy, who had sat in my living room with hungry eyes watching me reach for the pen. I said, "No." I got in Margaret's car. 3 weeks after the court hearing, the district attorney filed charges. Brian, felony elder financial abuse, conspiracy, filing false reports. Kelly, conspiracy, filing false reports. Tom, conspiracy, fraud, abuse of legal process. Ashley was not charged. She had gone to the district attorney's office voluntarily before charges were filed with her own attorney and had given a full statement. Her cooperation was complete, and it strengthened the case against Brian and Tom substantially. The charges destroyed what remained. Brian and Sarah's marriage ended within a month. He lost his company to the creditors. Kelly and Tom's marriage collapsed. Tom lost his law license. Their financial situation, the one they had tried to solve using my assets, became catastrophically worse. Extended family divided. My sister stood with me from the first phone call. Paul's brother was completely in my corner. Some cousins had heard the early version of the story, the declining mother, the worried children, and had not gotten the updated version. Some people simply disappeared rather than choose sides. My church was complicated in the way that communities are always complicated when the truth disrupts a comfortable narrative. Several people told me I should forgive my children. That family was family, that carrying this would hurt me more than them. I want to address that directly because I know many of you will hear exactly this if you fight back. Forgiveness is a private matter. It is between a person and their own conscience and their own God if they have one. It is not a public obligation, and it is not owed on anyone else's timeline. And forgiveness does not mean reconciliation. It does not mean pretending the harm didn't happen. It does not mean restoring access to someone who destroyed your trust deliberately and methodically. You are not required to forgive on demand. You are not required to make other people comfortable with your decision to protect yourself. And you are absolutely not required to let people back in who have demonstrated they will use that access to destroy you. Ashley called me 6 weeks after the charges were filed. She asked if she could come over. I said yes. She sat across from me at this kitchen table, looking diminished in a way I had never seen her look before, and she told me she had been in the DA's office. She said she didn't expect forgiveness. She said she wanted to see that I was okay. She said she thought about Paul every day and what he would have thought of what they had done. She was right about Paul. It would have destroyed him. I said I was okay. I said I didn't know what we were to each other now. I said the door was not open, but it was not locked. She left after an hour. We have had careful, slow conversations since then. I don't know what it will become. I am not in a hurry. Time will tell me who she is now. Brian refused the plea deal. He went to trial. His lawyer tried several angles: vindictive mother, misinterpreted concern, loving son, the group chat taken out of context. I testified for 3.5 hours. On cross-examination, Brian's lawyer said, "Mrs. Patterson, isn't it true that you were suspicious of your children before they expressed any concern about your health?" I said, "I became suspicious when my son fabricated a phone call I never made and used it as evidence of my cognitive decline. I have phone records proving the call never happened. I requested those records the same week he made the claim." The lawyer tried another angle. "Isn't it possible you simply forgot the call?" I said. "The call did not happen. My phone records show no outgoing call to my son on the date he described. That is not forgetting. That is fabrication. And the fact that my documentation captured exactly what I suspected does not mean I was paranoid. It means I was right." Brian's lawyer asked me, toward the end of my testimony, "Mrs. Patterson, do you love your son?" The courtroom was very quiet. I said, "I love the child I raised. I will grieve him for the rest of my life. The man who sat across from me at my kitchen table and lied about my own mind while planning to strip me of my legal rights is not the child I raised. I don't know who that man is, but the child I raised, yes, I love him. I will always love him." A woman on the jury, who looked to be in her late 50s, put her hand over her mouth when I said that. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. Guilty on all counts. Brian received 18 months in prison. Kelly received house arrest, probation, and community service. Tom received 2 years and was disbarred. Ashley's cooperation agreement stood. I did not go to the sentencing. I had said everything I needed to say. Let me tell you where I am now, 18 months from that Saturday morning. My house is mine. My accounts are mine. My will is sealed and held by Margaret with protections so thorough that changing anything would require multiple independent evaluations and court approval. I am not accessible. I sleep well. People always ask me this. They expect that the answer is no, that I lie awake with grief and anger and all the complications of what happened. But the answer is yes. I sleep better than I have in years, because fear is exhausting in ways you do not fully recognize until it stops. For the 2 years that this was happening to me, there was a low-level fear running underneath everything. Fear of my own children, fear of what they were capable of, fear of whether I was wrong about myself in the ways they were suggesting. That fear consumed energy I didn't know I was spending. When it was replaced by clarity, even costly, painful clarity, even clarity that came with the loss of my children and the fracturing of my family, my body relaxed in a way I hadn't experienced since before Paul got sick. I went to Portugal in the spring. I am going to New Zealand in the fall. Paul and I talked about New Zealand for 20 years and never went because there was always something else. There is nothing stopping me now. I volunteer 4 days a week at the shelter. I sit on their board. I helped them secure a grant that added 10 beds. 10 women who needed somewhere safe now have somewhere safe. Gloria and I walk every Sunday morning and have breakfast at a diner we both love. 2 other women from book club have become real friends, the kind where real means something because you have learned the difference. Brian is in prison. He has not contacted me. Through Rachel, who I keep on retainer, I know he is not adjusting well. I do not wish him suffering. When I try to feel something about him, I find mostly a quiet absence. The absence of feeling for your own child is its own particular kind of grief. There is no word for it that I have found. Kelly has written to me 3 times. I read the first letter. It spent more time explaining her reasoning than acknowledging the harm, which is the kind of apology that is really a negotiation. I did not respond. I did not open the second or third letters. I am not ready and may never be, and both of those outcomes are acceptable. Ashley and I have slow, careful conversations every few weeks. She is in therapy. She tells me things she is learning about herself. I listen. Sometimes what she says helps me understand something I was still carrying. We are not mother and daughter the way we were. We are something without a name, fragile and honest and cautious. I am not ready to call it hope, but I am not ready to call it nothing. The grandchildren. Brian's children are with Sarah, who has moved to another state. I hope they find me when they're old enough to look. I have written them letters that Margaret is holding for when they turn 18. Kelly's son apparently asks his grandmother where I am. I don't know what she tells him. Ashley's daughter, who is 4, came to my house once with Ashley 6 months ago. She sat at this kitchen table and ate the cookies I had made and showed me a drawing of what she said was a cat. It looked more like a cloud with legs. I put it on my refrigerator. It is still there. That afternoon was the first time since all of this began that I felt something I would call uncomplicated. Just a small child eating cookies in my kitchen. Just that with nothing underneath it. It was enough. 3 months ago, a woman named Patricia contacted me. She was 59 and her children were doing to her exactly what mine had done to me. She had found an article about my case and tracked me down. I walked her through every step. My attorney, the cognitive evaluation, the documentation, the private investigator, the trap. She fought back. She won her case. She called me after and said, "You saved my life, not just my money, my life. If you hadn't talked about it, I would have thought I was alone and I would have given up." That phone call is why I am making this video. That is the whole reason. Not to perform my own survival, not to punish my children publicly. But because Patricia is not alone, and neither is she the only one, and there are women sitting somewhere right now who need to know this is happening, that it is being done to them deliberately and strategically, and that they can fight back and they can survive it. Here is everything I know about fighting back. The moment something feels wrong, document it. Do not wait until you are sure. Do not wait until you can prove it. Buy a journal. Write down what happened, what was said, by whom, what date, exactly what words were used. Do this the day something feels off. Because if you are right, that documentation becomes evidence. And if you are wrong, you have lost nothing but a little time. Get your own cognitive evaluation before there is any conflict. Go to your doctor, get a referral to a neuropsychologist, get the evaluation, get the results, seal them with your attorney. Because if conflict comes later, you want documentation from before it started, not after. Documentation after looks defensive. Documentation from before looks prophetic. Get your own attorney, not one your children recommend, not their friend. Not anyone whose name they have given you for any reason. Your own attorney, independently found, someone who works for you and only you, and who has zero relationship with anyone in your family. Secure your finances, change your passwords, remove secondary access you may have given casually over the years, notify your bank in writing of your preferences regarding access. Consider a credit freeze. Tell one trusted person outside your family everything, where your documents are, who your attorney is, what is happening. Give them a key to this situation in case you ever need someone to open the door. Do not confront your children before you are legally protected. I know every instinct says to confront immediately, to look them in the eye and demand the truth. But confrontation before you have protection gives them the opportunity to escalate, to accelerate their plan, to do something irreversible before you have your defenses in place. Get protected first, then act. Do not sign anything, not one thing, not without your own attorney reviewing it first and explaining every word, not under any time pressure they create, not because they are crying, not because they say they love you and this is for your own good, not one signature. Trust yourself. This is the hardest one because they have worked so hard to make you not trust yourself. They have specifically targeted your faith in your own perceptions and your own memory because that is the most effective weapon they have. You know your own mind, you know your own life. When you feel that something is wrong and you cannot quite articulate why, that feeling deserves respect. That feeling has information in it. Listen to it. Now, I want to say something directly to you, the woman watching this at whatever hour you are watching it. You are not imagining it. I know the specific doubt that creeps in when your own children question your memory. I know what it feels like to have the people you raised look at you with performed concern and find yourself wondering if they might be right. I know how frightening it is to consider that your own mind might be unreliable because that is the most frightening possibility there is. And they know it is the most frightening possibility. And that is exactly, precisely, deliberately why they use it. You are not imagining it. Trust is not blindness. Loving your children is not the same as accepting abuse from them. Protecting yourself is not abandoning them. You can fight for your autonomy and still love them. You can enforce your boundaries and still wish them well. Those are not contradictions. They are both completely true simultaneously, and anyone who tells you otherwise is asking you to choose your own destruction in the name of keeping the peace. Do not keep the peace at the cost of yourself. The peace that requires you to be diminished is not peace. It is just quieter suffering. I also want to say something about the grief, because I think people expect that when you fight back and win, the grief resolves. It does not. The grief is permanent in the way that all real losses are permanent. I have lost my children. Not to death, but to something that in some ways is harder than death because they are out there living their lives, and I am not in those lives. I grieve that every day. I do not pretend I don't. I do not paste a story about growth and gratitude over the top of it and call it healed. What I can tell you is that the grief coexists with the peace, and the peace is real. The peace of having chosen yourself. The peace of sleeping in your own house that belongs to you. The peace of knowing that you looked at the hardest thing you have ever faced and you did not look away from it. That peace is available to you too. I promise you it is. 6 months ago, Brian's attorney contacted Margaret. Brian is appealing his conviction. He needs money for the appeal. He wanted to reach out to me. I thought about it for the length of time it took me to walk from my home office to the kitchen and make a cup of tea. I made my tea. I drank it. I looked out at Paul's garden, the one I have kept alive for 4 years, the roses he planted the spring before he got sick. I told Margaret no, just no, nothing more needed. I am Diane Patterson. I am 63 years old. I live in my house that belongs to me. I sleep well. I am going to New Zealand in the fall. There is a drawing of a cloud with legs on my refrigerator. My children called me unstable. They were wrong. The most stable thing I have ever done is refuse to let my own family take my life away from me. If you are going through this right now, every resource you need is in the description below. The National Elder Abuse Hotline, legal aid organisations in every state. Information on finding an elder law attorney, instructions on requesting a cognitive evaluation, how to report elder abuse to Adult Protective Services. Call them this week, not next week, this week. And if you know someone who might need to hear this, share this video with her. Because the woman who needs it most is probably the one who would never search for it herself. The one who is sitting somewhere writing things down in a journal and wondering if she is imagining it. She is not imagining it. Send her this. Leave me a comment. Tell me what you are going through or what you have survived. Tell me what part of this story you recognized. I read every single comment, everyone, because you are here and that matters. I will see you next week. And remember, they call you unstable because the truth you are carrying makes them uncomfortable. Carry it anyway. You are not alone. You are not crazy. And you are so much stronger than you know. Bon, wafades.